Really warm welcome again. This is part 3 of a five-part series on gratitude as a path to awakening. If you haven't made the previous sessions, don't worry, I'm going to do a recap. It is a rather longer recap because I'm now going to recap 2 talks. It'll get a bit longer each week, or 3 talks. But there will be a recap, so hopefully you can all catch up. I think another title, or possibly even a better title for this series, would have been The Grateful Buddha. Because I think the key theme of this series is understanding what it means to see the Buddha as primarily a being of gratitude. The Buddha as someone who saw something so precious that he spent the rest of his life in a great outpouring of gratitude to all beings, just because of how beautiful it was, how beautiful what he saw was. And the perspective that we're presenting in these series of talks is something like we're still in the field of the Buddha's gratitude. We're still living, whether we know it or not, drenched in the Buddha's gratitude, a gratitude that is so vast that it cuts across space and time, reaching all of us wherever we happen to be, there if only we're willing to turn towards it. I'm going to read a passage that I ended last week's talk with. Last week I was suggesting that the Buddha Amitabha, who's a sort of mythical Buddha or a Buddha outside space and time, these Buddhas or enlightenment beings show up in the tradition, often as a result of meditation visions. They show up as crystallizing, symbolizing the Buddha's awakened qualities beyond the run of the ordinary, beyond ordinary space and time, shedding their spiritual influence over us right now, even though we're not in touch with Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder of the Buddha tradition, who lived 2,500 years ago. So I'm going to read this passage. I'll read the whole thing because I think it will be helpful. And if you like, you can. There are going to be lots of images of light, so you might want to close your eyes as we get to the various images of light and illumination. You might just want to imagine the deep red light that represents the love of this Buddha shining down on us. Oh, and hello to people on Zoom. I often forget that. Hi, Zoomers. So this is the passage. It's from Naga Priya's excellent book on Shinran, a figure that we've been talking about quite a lot in the last couple of weeks. I'll say more about him later. You may be more accustomed to conceive of the Buddha as a terrestrial being, one who belongs to human history, who walked this earth, yet awakened to some extraordinary transformative insight. The Buddha then is special, yes, but not radically different from us. He was born as we are born. He appears to us more or less comprehensible, recognizable, albeit perhaps much wiser than we are. But Amida is another name for Amitabha. Amida is not of this nature. Amida is not the historical Buddha, but an archetypal reality that transcends space and time. He became central to much of East Asian Buddhism, often eclipsing the importance even of Shakyamuni himself. Amida, or Amitabha, is the Buddha of infinite or boundless light. This Buddha, also known as Amitayus, or boundless life, sometimes is depicted as golden in colour, sometimes as dark red, the colour of the setting sun, and sits in meditative contemplation, radiating light throughout the cosmos, a light that blesses all beings with both wisdom and compassion, without exception and without conditions. Amida is awakening awareness, the sun lighting up the darkness, the gift of light that impartially and inexhaustibly shines on all. Amida is both infinite light and infinite life. In terms of both space and time, Amida calls forth a reality that is beyond measure, beyond limit, beyond reckoning. Amida overflows our perceptual categories. We so readily take light for granted, yet it remains utterly mysterious. Light is indivisible, unbounded, invisible. Light permits seeing, and so serves as a symbol of consciousness and wisdom. Light bedazzles us, light reveals. In her short poem, Bearing the Light, Denise Levertov contemplates how raindrops hanging from the branches of a pear tree are lit up by the morning light. Rain diamonds this winter morning embellish the tangle of unpruned pear tree twigs. Each solitaire, placed, it appears, with considered judgment, bears the light beneath the rifted clouds, the invisible shared out in endless abundance. Light is shared out in endless abundance, and yet remains indivisible. This is the mystery of light. It is not an object itself, but a condition under which objects are seen, by means of which they are able to reveal themselves. Objects bear the light. Light gives life. Light is awakening. So this is the central image of this series of talks, a Buddha of boundless light, whose consciousness shines so strongly, so fiercely with love, that the light of that love crosses the borders of space and time, and is just there, or is just here, shining on us, ready for us to open to it. The problem is that we live in what Vajragupta in the first talk a few weeks ago called the entitlement mode. We tend to live on the basis of what can I get out of this world? What's in it for me? How do I live in a way that such that I avoid what's painful, I get what's pleasurable, and everyone thinks I'm special and important. I don't think it's just me. I think humans just do that. But what that means is that we're closed. We're closed to the beauty all around us. Everywhere, light falls, the light of the sun, the light of life itself, encouraging growth, lifting the plants from the soil, warming our bodies, light falling everywhere. And it's like we don't see it. We don't see it because we're too busy worrying about ourselves. So we've been presenting this possibility of understanding the whole Buddhist path as a path of turning away from or opening out from entitlement mode, the mode of what's in it for me, into gratitude mode, opening to the abundance that's all around us, which is, you could say, what the Buddha himself did. And in doing so, we see what the Buddha saw. In fact, we see what the Buddha himself became, which is the overflowing abundance that is our reality. This world, yes, of pain, but also of endless potential and possibility. A possibility that we can activate if we're only willing to open the mind to gratitude. Last week, I tackled the question of how could it possibly be that the Buddha, this person who lived 2,500 years ago, is still influencing us. How could it be that the light of his awakening is still shining down, that's still there for us to receive? And the way I tried to account for this or help us understand this is that what he saw when he woke up was that there is a kind of force in the universe, active but latent, ready to lift us out of the imprisonment of the self. A kind of liberation of the very life force, the very energy that we're trying to protect through our fixation on our own welfare. We feel there's something really important, really significant burning within us. We try to protect it, and in doing so we stifle it. He let go of that, and what he found was that life itself unfurled around him quite naturally, quite spontaneously. And this unfurling, the force this released, was so powerful. We're very, very powerful creatures as humans. Someone in America says, for example, sends ripples across the whole globe, several times a day. We're hugely powerful. This capacity we have to choose to communicate our minds and for our thought to direct our actions, enormously powerful. The Buddha discovered that if we liberate that vital force, it becomes powerful beyond all measure, and it naturally just wants to help others. It wants to help others out of gratitude for the beauty and mystery of existence itself. This can all sound very complicated, but it's actually a really simple perspective. It's a perspective that's so simple that it became the most popular form of Buddhism in East Asia. It's a perspective that can be reduced to something like this. The Buddha Amitabha loves you, so just trust him and everything will be okay. The Buddha of radiant red light, he loves you. All you have to do is trust. Of course, the rational mind wants to explain all that, wants to explain why and how that's possible. And it was in concession to that I talked so much about this idea of a liberated will. But the perspective is extremely simple. And I also spoke a little bit, and I'm going to speak a bit more about this later, of how powerful that perspective can be, particularly in respect to allowing us to forgive ourselves for our limitations. Shinran, the great Japanese called Pure Land Buddhist practitioner. The Pure Land is the tradition that's centered on this idea that all you have to do is call out to Amitabha, to trust him, and awakening will be assured. He came to the belief that he couldn't make progress anymore on his own. He was incapable, and actually he lived in an age where genuine spiritual progress from one's own efforts was impossible. What he called the calculating mind always gets in the way. It always becomes about me, again and again, always circling back to the self. He was very honestly, openly fallible. He didn't claim to be perfect, and yet he claimed to have found a perspective that he called Shinjin. I'm going to talk about this perspective Shinjin later, which is the settled state. Settled in complete trust of Amitabha's love. A state where you deeply existentially relax because you know that you can never really be separated from the love of the Buddha. This Buddha who, seeing reality face to face, poured out a timeless outpouring of gratitude, which we're still potentially the beneficiaries of, if only we open to it. So that was a quick recap of the last couple of weeks. We're following a bit of a trajectory on these talks, a trajectory which will be familiar to some of you. We're following what's called the trajectory of the Triratna system of practice. So Triratna is the Buddhist community that this Buddhist centre is part of. And we have a map of what the spiritual path looks like. The path begins with the stage of, there's four or five stages, I'm going to say four, with integration, with gathering up our capacity to make choices, to be moral agents behind something we care about. In the first week, we were doing that in relation to gratitude. We have this ability to direct our own minds, to make choices in how we think and act. can we direct the mind and heart towards gratitude? The second stage is positive emotion, deliberately turning more fully towards the positive. So last week, you could say what we were doing in starting to turn our minds towards Amitabha's love was definitely stepping into the stage of positive emotion. The third stage, I won't tell you what the fourth one is, you'll hear about this next week. The third stage is the stage of spiritual death. The stage of spiritual death. So having seen that there's a limit to how deeply we can let go into what's beautiful, what's good, what's positive, we encounter pain. The self doesn't want to let go. The self doesn't want to let go because it feels dangerous. Could we really trust that this world of pain and horror and desperation and war is a world where we could completely let go into trusting the Buddha's love? Wouldn't that be stupid? Might that be stupid? That sounds dangerous. Can we really do that? Are we convinced that that's possible? It's a big ask. So that's going to be the topic for the rest of today's talk. How we can take that step. Okay. So one of the first things you'll find out about Buddhism if you do it for a bit is that it's got a diagnosis of the problem that humans have, and its diagnosis is the self. There's something off about the self. Often we're a bit vague about exactly what that means. Buddhism has got some very, very precise ways of talking about this, but it's something to do with the self. Maybe getting rid of the self, or going beyond the self, or letting go of the ego. These are ideas you'll encounter. And often what questions you get from people very early on, which I think tend to get dismissed, not very fairly, is, so if Buddhism's about like letting go of the self, why do we do all this practice? Because surely we're just like building up a self, like I'm doing the mindfulness of breathing meditation, or I'm doing a loving kindness meditation, or I'm being ethical. Like, what's the point of all that? Very common question. I remember a friend of mine who was at the time got into recovery for heroin addiction. This was back 10 years or so ago. Very smugly coming to me with this question, like thinking it was going to completely defeat me. At the time, I felt like I'd argued back well, that, it's not really about completely letting go of the self, it's about growing a bigger, more abundant self that gradually can let go more and more. These are stories, these are ways of talking about it you'll hear. And all of those ways of explaining it are quite good. We do need to let go of the self, but in order to do that, we need a very, very positive, very open, very steady selfhood. We can't just let go. It would just shatter us. It would be too much. But Shinran, so this figure we've been talking about, Shinran, who was an 11th, 12th century Japanese Buddhist teacher, the founder of his own version of what's called the Pure Land School. That's a school of Buddhism centering on the idea that all you have to do is ask for Amitabha's help and enlightenment will be assured. He came up against this question in a way that he thought was insurmountable. He felt like there was no way beyond the self. The problem was something like this. Even whenever you're practicing Buddhism, deliberately trying to do something, trying to cultivate positive qualities of heart and mind, trying to be kinder to others, trying to offer up your energy for service, to be helpful, there's always me in it. And he said there's just no way out of that. There's no way out of what he called the calculating mind. And actually, although, as I say, often when newcomers ask that question about the self, we come up with all kinds of convincing sounding responses. It is a real problem. At a certain point, because Buddhism genuinely is about completely going beyond everything we think we know about me and mine, there is a point where something has to change. There's this story that Sangharakshita tells. Sangharakshita is the founder of this particular Buddhist tradition, but from the Zen tradition, which I couldn't find the source of, but so I might not tell it right. But the story is that someone, a practitioner, Dharma practitioner, Buddhist practitioner, is trying to gain enlightenment, and it's like he's trying to climb a greasy flagpole. So you've got this greasy flagpole, and he's trying to climb it. His hands are slipping, but eventually, after years and years of training and struggle, he does learn to climb to the top of this greasy flagpole, and he gets to the top, and he realizes he's still not there. Something else has to happen, some kind of leap. Yeah, I'm going to do this now. So I feel a bit hesitant to do this, but no, I think I will. I think I'm going to tell a bit of a story about this from my own life. I gave you a bit of some of my story last week, so to fill people in who weren't there, I was talking about how when I first got started practicing Buddhism, I really applied everything I knew about how to get good at stuff. I worked really hard. I treated meditation a bit like a sport, that if you just do enough of it, you'll get really good. And it worked in a way. And also about 3 years in, I had a massive crash, collapse. I hit a wall. I felt like I didn't even know if I wanted to do Buddhism. I felt like my motive had been so much about just building up an impressive self who was somehow really, really good at meditating. And trying to please my teachers. I was living at the London Buddhist Centre at the time in Bethnal Green, and I left and didn't talk to anyone in Triratna for about a year and a half, pretty much. Maybe one or two people. My partner at the time was still practicing, so I talked to her, but I just completely stepped back. And during that time, as I talked about last week, I started to find a perspective that was a bit along the lines of Shinran's, that there was a love, a grace even, that I could let go into, which had nothing to do with how hard I was trying. And gradually that healed something. At the time, I was actually exploring Christianity, which is all about, being healed by God's grace. I didn't, in the end, feel like that was the right path for me. But something of that flavour of just total surrender to a love beyond the self began to permeate into my practice. And I did decide to come back. I came back in about 2017. Decided to start training to join the Buddhist order that I'm part of, and that others who you'll see with these things are part of. And I thought I'd tell the next part of that story. So basically, I had another cycle of the same thing. So in about, I think towards the end of 2019, I started to have quite a big change in my meditation practice. A lot more absorption was naturally available. I started to be able to really just play in meditation. It stopped being a kind of struggle with my own distraction. I started just being able to really enjoy it, and a lot of pleasure and happiness started to come. It's like when you're learning to meditate, right? People say, "Oh no, don't worry about whether there's thoughts. The main practice is just coming back." Of course, you're like, "Yeah, eventually though, can the thoughts stop, please? Because this is really uncomfortable." Well, that kind of happened. I learned how to do that. I just wonder, it's getting very dark. James, could you see the lights on? Oh yeah, that's better. I started to get quite good at meditation after years of having tried to do that. So I'd let go into a much more open, softer perspective. And as a result, things really started to open up in meditation. And about that time, me and a friend started to really get interested in this set of absorbed luminous states in meditation called the dhyanas, which you might have come across. I've even taught about them here to some people. I think some people have even been on a retreat where I taught some of that. They were really promoted by the Buddhists, by the Buddha in the early texts as being very important ways of training the mind, particularly creating a mind that's very bright, present, luminous, flexible, which then enables a much more refined and kind of precise and flexible mode of self-examination, which the early tradition teaches is what's necessary in order to do this very difficult work of letting go of self-clinging. So me and a friend, an order member friend of mine, really got stuck into learning about and exploring these. We would often write to each other every day. This is the person whose house someone's just moved into. I was just talking before the class. So a really good friend of mine, and our friendship deepened a lot through this. Lots of exchanges, very intensely over the course of about a year, and gradually these realms just opened up, very beautiful, luminous, like a store of happiness that felt I hadn't. Overall, I think it's probably true to say my life hasn't been terribly happy. A lot of difficulty, a lot of struggle, a lot of pain, a lot of insecurity. And it was like, one of the similes actually in the tradition is it's like being in a desert and you encounter this pool or an oasis. You encounter an oasis with a big, pure body of water in it. And as you approach, you realize it's not a mirage. And you get closer and closer and you're delighted. You're so delighted that you start drinking and you drink and you drink and it's so good. And your thirst gets sated and you're like, actually, this is so good that I'm just going to jump in. You jump into the water, you bathe, you soothe all your aching muscles. It's beautiful. And it was like that. Just so much beauty. Refined, luminous beauty. I think at one point, I remember coming back from a month-long solitary when I was exploring these. And I remember telling someone, it was like I'd been kissed by an angel. Incredible beauty. And at the same time, sometimes I thought maybe something's a bit off with this. Am I getting a bit obsessed? Am I getting a bit tight? Sometimes the Buddha, when he was teaching these kinds of meditative states, would say, do enjoy them, do steep yourself in them, but do not let them obsess your mind, or do not let them infatuate your mind. I was like, am I a bit infatuated? And I was like, yeah, maybe, but this is so great, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And this was just before, pretty soon before I went off to be ordained. So I around this time went off on this 3-month retreat where this was in 2020, and I joined the True Vajragupta Buddhist order, the end of a very long training process which had this quite big bump in it, as I've just described to you. And I was on this retreat and wanting to just continue practicing in this way. And as I was on the retreat, it became increasingly clear that something was a bit up. I was meditating, and I was sitting with all the other retreatants, and I'd be, blissing out. And I'd realise, what is this emotion? It's very nice, it's warm, it's contented. It's smugness. I've been told some of you this story before, I'm absorbed in smugness. Subtle, really hard to spot, but definitely there. I'm in this lovely state. I'm special and important because of it, and you all have to suffer with your messy minds. That was all subtly woven into this very lovely seeming state. And that revealed itself more and more as the weeks and weeks went on. It was a long retreat, 3 months. It became clearer and clearer, and more humiliatingly clear even, that I had stickily attached to. I'd made an ego project out of these kinds of blissful states. I'd made it into something that the self had achieved, and I just remember it being like a gradual descent into a great toxic lake of shame. I just felt so ashamed. I didn't want people to know. I didn't even, my hesitation telling the story, I still don't love telling this story, because I think I still do it sometimes. I think that's still something I'm working with. But I just remember in my meditation, the image would sometimes be that especially in the mornings, I'd wake up in the mornings and sit in meditation, and it felt like there was this kind of swamp that I was sitting in that was just made of acid, and the acid was shame, and it was just kind of eating me alive. And so I had to give up, basically. I had to completely give up this quite established way of meditating that brought so much happiness and pleasure, and just try and let it go. And it really felt like it was kind of breaking me apart. I've been through a few waves of this since. This is kind of ongoing. It really felt like at that time it was kind of breaking me apart. And I felt ill with it. I remember just like I got thin, I lost a lot of weight, I couldn't sleep. I really was having a rough time. And it wasn't just this, but it was I think mostly this. And I got back, everyone else was like all, shining and looked really happy. And I got back and I just felt like done in after these 3 months. And then got home, ate a load of very nutritious food, slept a lot, and after 3 weeks, I felt great. It was like something in me had to die. Something in me had to die, and I didn't experience it as at all pleasant at the time, but what it then released was a few years of really a lot of inspiration and energy and love. And yet, it was so painful that looking back on it, I still don't like to think of it. And I think that's probably because it's incomplete. It's an incomplete process for me. Part of why I've enjoyed giving these talks so much and beginning to read around Shinran is that he offers a perspective where that is okay. It is okay for us to be completely incomplete in our ability to give up self-clinging. There's a parable about this. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, a bit more about shame and humiliation towards the end, and say something maybe hopefully a bit more redemptive about it. I'm going to read this passage from Shinran. He tells this story of what this is like. He describes a similar kind of situation. What happens when you encounter the limits of my ability to practice. And that was kind of what happened. Like everything I knew, I felt I'd learned about how to practice. Again, it had to go. He says, suppose there's a traveller journeying 100,000 li, which presumably is a Japanese unit of measurement. I don't know how long that is. Suppose there's a traveller journeying 100,000 li towards the west, when, suddenly, along the way, he comes upon 2 rivers in a single channel. One river is of fire, extending southward, and one is of water, extending north. Each river is 100 paces across, immeasurably deep and endless to the north and south. So you've got 2 rivers that are kind of, lose the page, got 2 rivers that are sort of flowing together like this. Is that making sense? So one river of water, one river of fire, and they're flowing together into one river. But somehow the water's not putting the fire out. Okay, good. So dividing the fire and water is a single white path, 4 or 5 inches wide. That's about that wide, isn't it? This path from the eastern bank to the western bank is 100 paces in length. Billows of water surge over the path and flames sweep up to scorch it. Water and fire thus alternate without break. Now, the traveller has already journeyed deep into the vast and solitary wilderness. There is no one to be seen. But bands of brigands and wild beasts lurk there, and seeing the traveller alone, they vie with each other to kill him. Fearing for his life, the the traveller at once flees towards the west, even without fearing for his life, the traveller flees at once towards the west, when, without warning, the great river appears, the great river of fire and water. He reflects, I can see no end to this river, either north or south. In the middle is a white path, but it's exceedingly narrow. Although the two banks are but slightly separated, how is it possible to cross? Assuredly, this day I shall die. If I turn back, brigands and wild beasts will press closer and closer upon me. If I run north or south, beasts and poisonous insects will contend with each other to attack me. If I venture on the path westward, I will surely plunge into the two currents of fire and water. There are no words to express the terror and despair that fill him at this point. He thinks further to himself, if I turn back now, I die. If I remain here, I die. If I go forward, I die. There is no way for me to escape death. Therefore, I choose to go forth, venturing on this path. Since this path exists, it must be possible to cross the rivers. When this thought occurs to him, he suddenly hears the encouraging voice of someone on the eastern bank. O traveller, just resolve to follow this path forward. You will certainly not encounter the grief of death, but if you stay where you are, you will surely die. Further, someone on the western bank, that's behind him, calls him, O traveller. No, wait, I've got this confused. Okay, further, someone on the other bank calls him, O traveller, with mind that is single, with right mindfulness, come at once. I will protect you. Have no fear of plunging to grief in the fire and water. The traveller, having heard the exhortation, okay, so this is, you've got the path, and on one side of the bank, there's the first person who's encouraging him. On the far side, you've got someone also encouraging him, saying, you won't have no fear of plunging into the fire or water. The traveller, having heard this encouragement on both sides of the river and the call, immediately requires firm resolution in body and mind and decisively takes the path, advancing directly without entertaining any doubt or apprehension. When he's gone but 1 or 2 paces, the brigands on the eastern bank call out to him, O traveller, come back! The path is treacherous and permits no crossing. You are certain to meet your death. None of us address you with evil intent. Just come back. The traveller hears the voices calling him, but he gives no backward glance. Thinking only of the path, he advances directly forward with the mind that is single, and forthwith reaches the far side, free forever from all afflictions. He meets his good friends, and his joy is boundless. This is the parable. So you get the idea, right? The path beyond the self is narrow. When we look at it, it looks like it's covered with flames, will be burnt or will drown. That's certainly how it felt. The traveller is cornered. Have you ever felt like that, cornered by your own insecurities and doubts and conceit, cornered by the desire to impress others and the fear that produces and the sense that surely there's a way out of this? Cornered by the sense that life has to be about something better than this, but I keep on tripping myself up. It's possible to get to a point where you'd rather die than carry on with that. I feel at times I've been to a point where I'd rather die than carry on a life like that, a life lived from that. Unfortunately, it's not just before you start practicing Buddhism that can happen. That can happen well on the way into it. That was about that retreat of mine where I definitely felt like I just wanted it all to end. Had enough. That retreat was about 10 years into my life as a kind of serious, dedicated Dharma practitioner. But that moment is the moment when the narrow white path presents itself. It's the moment when, to use a different turn of phrase of Shinran's, the great leap sideways is needed. I'm going to read a poem from Shinran. The light of compassion that grasps us and illuminates and protects us always. So the light of compassion that grasps us and illumines and protects us always, and the darkness of our ignorance is already broken through. Still the clouds and mists of greed, desire, anger and hatred cover us always, the sky of true and real faith. But though the light of the sun is veiled by clouds and mist, beneath the clouds and mist there is brightness, not dark. When one realizes Shinjin, this is this deep trusting of Amitabha. When one realizes Shinjin, seeing and revering and attaining with great joy, one immediately leaps crosswise, severing the 5 evil courses. One immediately leaps crosswise. So you have this another image for the same thing. You have these fires burning. The path looks impossible. The self thinks that the end has come with this coming up against its own limitations. But if you're willing to leap, if you're willing to walk the narrow path, setting aside, if you can, mistrust, trusting the friends calling from the other side, it all becomes possible. The Buddha talks about this in a parable where he's speaking to Ananda, one of his disciples. Ananda says, what's it like for the self to be liberated? And the Buddha says, well, imagine a house. You have a house, and imagine the sun comes up to one side, from one side. What happens, Ananda? He asks. The Buddha asks Ananda, his attendant, what happens when the sun strikes one wall? And Ananda says, well, the sun hits that wall. The Buddha says, okay, well, imagine there's not a wall there. What happens to the sun? Okay, well, it hits another wall inside the house. The Buddha says, well, okay, Ananda, well, imagine that wall's not there. What happens? The sun just travels endlessly across the landscape. The Buddha says, so too, a mind liberated has no limitation. It shines out endlessly. So what actually happens is beautiful beyond our wildest dreams. What the ego thinks will happen is death. The self thinks the end will come. Shinran's solution to this was this concept of Shinjin, this idea of true trusting. Trusting that the Buddha's enlightenment was so powerful that we actually need to do very little. We need to do very little except turn our mind towards the Buddha. The stream of his gratitude, noting that we don't have to be grateful to him. His gratitude is just flowing in the universe. He's just offering it as a free gift. It's very hard to accept a free gift, isn't it? I'm noticing people like, what would that even be like? It's really difficult to evoke this perspective. Has anyone ever had it where someone's just unexpectedly just given you a load of money for no reason, or just a bit of money for no reason? It's like, or just like, we just have this. And like, what? And you're like, why? I remember I led a study group a while ago, and someone just gave me this at the end. No one's ever done this before or since, but they were just like, they were leaving the study group. We'd been together for a year, and they just gave me an envelope. I was like, what's that? And he was like, oh, it's a gift. And it had like £300 in it. I was like, what? You can't do that. I was like, yeah, I can. And I went away and thought about it. I talked to Vajragupta, my friend who run the Buddhist Center together, and he's like, no, that's fine. He's just being generous. And it's quite confusing, I think. Like, what would it be like to accept this life with all its beauty and magic and strangeness as a free gift? Like a free gift that we're just here. All we have to do is enjoy it. this life, which is fundamentally the same, non-different than the reality the Buddha saw, the reality the Buddha unified his mind with. It's just here. Can we just accept it? And then practice, Dharma practice, becomes just a giving out of generosity. We've just received something, so we'll just give because we feel like it. Not something the self has to struggle and strive to do. What would it be like to see life like that sometimes? Looking at your face, I'm like, can people imagine that? I don't know. Sometimes I can, at times I can, and it's a huge relief. In the Pure Land tradition, before Shinran, this tradition centered on Amitabha Buddha and his radiant light. In the Pure Land tradition before Shinran, there was this idea that this salvation through Amitabha's radiant gratitude, this salvation doesn't come during your lifetime, it comes at the moment of death. You have to live a life calling out Amitabha's name, and then when you die, Amitabha and his retinue will visit you. And you get ideas quite like this a lot in the Buddhist tradition. The reason for this, I think, is that it's so difficult to let go of the self, that death itself came to be seen as a great opportunity, because when you die, you have to let go of everything you think you know about yourself and your life. The body goes, breathing goes, friends and family go, and according to the accounts of meditators, practitioners from the history of Buddhism, consciousness does still continue to operate in some form, and it's completely disoriented, terrified, afraid of the absolute unfamiliarity of what it's seeing. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what we see at the moment of death is a pure white light, a radiant, clear white light that is reality itself, that usually, if we're not trained, we turn away from in fear. We can't stand the brightness, the vividness, the aliveness of reality, so we hunker back down into the self, and gradually that leads to a new rebirth. So the reason that death, you might say, this is just my interpretation here, but I think the reason this idea of death as a point of practice becomes so popular is just that basically we're willing to die rather than let go of the self. And so the moment of death becomes an opportunity, because at least then we have no choice. We have to actually either accept our situation or just contract again and have another rebirth. Shinran, though, says his major reinterpretation of this tradition is that we don't have to wait till death, but we do have to contact the desperateness of our situation, the inescapability of our existential situation. We have to see that, like it or not, if you're still clinging on to a sense of self, you are cornered. If you're still clinging on to a sense of me and mine, this is my life, I'm going to protect it at all costs, I'm going to go around, as we all do, trying to make sure things are okay for me, and manipulating the world around us, you are that traveller caught on the wrong side of that path. You are cornered. We are cornered. If we don't see that, it's a living death. That's the perspective here. If we fail to see that, it is a living death. We're going to die anyway. We're going to die in an infinite way. Endless lifetimes of living death, the living death of not seeing reality for what it really is, of not living up to our potential, of that sense of something burning in the heart that wants to be released, that can never come out because of our own smallness. If we want to see and exist beyond that, we have to see that we are the traveller on the wrong side of the narrow path, and we need to take the leap. We need somehow to find a way of trusting. Amitabha says, when we realize true and real Shinjin, trusting, we are grasped. Amitabha grasps us. This hand of love comes to grasp us, never to be abandoned. It is not through our calculating that we attain it, but surely, solely by the compassionate means of Amitabha. So, this is a big ask, isn't it? This perspective is quite a big ask. It's a perspective you're probably more likely to find intuitive if your spiritual life, as mine did, came out of real existential desperation, where you really felt like life was unlivable. But I think it is a perspective that's available even if you not felt like that. At the same time, it's a lot to give up all. Shinran was saying, give it all up all at once. Give up me and mine, my projects, my plans, my scheming. Give it all up and trust Amitabha. But here in Sri Ratna, we have a more gradual path. And it's a path which involves the practice of confession. You could see confession as the practice of being willing to die a little bit before you actually die. So the reason I'm bringing up confession is that this whole presentation of Shinran's perspective on the Dharma, of the Pure Land perspective on the Dharma, particularly Shinran's, is about finding forgiveness for imperfection. The reason he found this path so healing and redemptive was a sense that his imperfections were inevitable. His imperfections were inevitable because they're part of having a separate selfhood. When we believe we're fixed and separate, we just start acting unskillfully, unkindly, because we're afraid. He found incredible release in the sense that Amitabha saw that. The Buddha's love touched that, knew that, and in spite of that, offered a way beyond it. That our particularity, our distinctiveness as individual beings, it just naturally involves being imperfect. It naturally involves an imperfection that in the end, it feels like such an obstacle, but it's not the obstacle we think it is, if only we're willing to kind of hand it over, to say, this is my imperfection. This is it. This is what it's like. This is what I'm like. And that is okay. It is okay because there's a love in the world big enough to hold it. So how do we actually do this? I'm going to suggest, not externally, we're going to have some sort of inner confessional time in the second half with some meditation and a ritual. But how we do this, you could say what we do is we notice moments when we've been acting out of entitlement. I noticed a tiny one earlier when I really wanted coffee in the morning. So James was making hot drinks and it was coffee, and it was like, basically my mind went, I hope it's okay to tell a story, James is being a bit slow, I need coffee right now. And I just elbow barged you out the way slightly. Do you remember that?
No, I didn't know.
Well, I did it gently in a kind of Buddhist way. It was like a soft Buddhist elbow barge. And in that moment, I don't know if you've ever had this, if you just catch yourself and you're being all polite, like, oh, I might just get hit. What's happening inside is demonic. What's happening inside is, I will destroy you, get out of my way, and I shall have my coffee, and I'll just destroy you anyway, just for fun. Like, the demon flares up. It wants death and it wants endings for anything that's in the way of me getting that extra bit of coffee that I wanted that morning. And on the one hand, it's funny, it's funny. We all have these little moments, and this is kind of the point. On the other, of course, developed over lifetimes, that becomes the most awful evil we know in the world. The Nazi regime was a regime built on that. I won't mention any current global politics, I think too sensitive, but there's a lot of that in the world. Taken to its extreme, we create hell. What Shinran's saying is that is inevitable. That is an inevitable part of being human. What we can do to stop growing that demon is to give it up now. To say, this is what I do, please take care of it. You might not be able to trust the Buddha to do this, especially if you're new, or even if you're not new. This other power perspective that we're talking about is very unfamiliar to most Westerners. But you might trust it with a friend's love. Even the love of a friend is a power beyond the self. You could just telling you guys, it brought that moment, it brought a bit of lightness, it brought a bit of relief. The forgiving acceptance of the kindly awareness of others is enough to begin to heal the great burden of shame that humans carry for the fact of our limited humanness. I tell you, we all carry that. We all wander around acting in a way that isn't quite. We kind of know it can't really be how we should act. Those little moments of cowardice, those little moments of fear, not saying something we know we need to say, those moments of unawareness, our lives are full of those. And there's a burden of shame in that. The seed syllable, so all the Buddhas, these mythical Buddhas, these Buddhas who exist outside of time, they have in their hearts what's called a seed syllable, which is like the kind of symbolic quintessence of that Buddha. Amitabha's is the letter or the syllable Hri. It's the syllable Hri, which also means to blush. Amitabha's light is red. It's the light of blushing. This word Hri in Sanskrit also means shame. It means the very positive, skillful shame, that blush you get when you tell someone who loves you that you've let yourself down or you've let someone else down. And the relief of that. The shame is good. The heat, the blush of shame in that context. Of course, there's very unhealthy shame, neurotic shame, which our world is full of. But shame a sense of shortcoming that's genuinely held in love, is healing. It's the healing red light of Amitabha's blush that continues from the perspective we've been studying over the last few weeks. This red blush that continues to pervade the universe, ready to hold and heal us if we're willing to allow it to. So in the second half, I'll leave it there for the talk. In the second half, we're going to actually explore that in direct experience meditatively a bit more. Thank you very much.